Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a short, hopefully short series of GitOps principles discussions with the GitOps working group. It doesn't have to be any more formal than that. Monday, March 29th, 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific. I guess I can't cover every time zone, but hi, everybody. So I wanted to, by the way, thank you all for being patient on last week. It turned out to be quite a hectic day. I'm glad this worked out. And thanks, Brees, for taking the reins there. I think the goal, please let me know if any of you disagree with this, but I believe the goal is to continue the momentum that we have on the principles, or rather that we've had, and there's kind of been a lag, not for any specific reason, but just other things have come up. And to understand if we have any, well, really, where the non-controversial items are from that existing pull request. And we can either update that one or save that for the next round, with many different, details, and then just move those commits over and, issue a simplification commit. But in any case, just to make sure that I think at the end of this, if possible, we would have at least what could be a pre-release that we could post to a new repo in the Open GitOps repo, because this would be a pre-release of a lasting artifact, a repo called Principles. And, I mean, I don't want to get into bike shedding the actual name of it, but basically something that is clearly not V1. So, if we want to do like Simber, like, whether it's V 0.1.0 or V 1.0 alpha 1 or something like this, however we want to do it, I think what do you all think about that as a goal?
Yeah, sounds good. So things we can move to done essentially, and what can we move to done from what we already have, and what needs to be worked on some more, and then we can figure out exactly how to work on the stuff that's left over.
Yeah. And I think there's also the component that we'll likely have to simplify, right? Because I think the level of granularity and detail of what we have might not be just kind of like movable.
Yeah.
So we'll need to kind of like condense and generalize into this new 0.1 or whatever
Absolutely.
that is.
So at a high level, I guess what I think is probably the most central is probably the principles themselves, right? The 4 principles. And I want to kind of gauge what people think about the 4 that we have, which are principle of declarative configuration, principle of immutable configuration versions, principle of continuous state reconciliation, and the principle of operations through declarations. Those are kind of the 4 ones we have there. And there's a short paragraph for each of them. What might be worth doing is maybe if I share my screen, and then we've got something we can have a look at together.
Yeah, Brees, did you all go to the HackMD doc last time?
No, we last week we just had a chat.
Okay, do you mind if we do that? I think
sounds good.
Because I think everything from there has already been transferred to the PR and then some, so we could just like copy right over that. Okay, I'll go ahead and set that up right now.
You just paste the link. I've got the principles here, and I can.
Oh, good. Okay.
Essentially, the summary in the PR, and I can put that down.
Perfect. Thank you. Because I have them. Oh dear, 1 second here.
Do you want me to try and set up a HackMD?
Well, no, I was going to use the same one, but actually we can just do it. That's right. We can do a new one here. I'll open it now. No, that's fine. I've got it. I just somehow was not able to find the old one. I don't know if it was removed or what. But okay, so let me go ahead and paste it. I'll make you all, or everyone should be able to write. Oh, signed in. Yeah, you just need to sign into HackMD. If you and I just signed in with my GitHub, so it should be fairly straightforward. So okay. Sounds good. Yeah, let me go ahead and paste in the summary we have. Hopefully that would be, well, we'll at least get to a place where where we can generally agree upon these, or see if are there any legitimate concerns? Oh, you did. Thank you.
Should we start using open GitOps across the board in this document from now on?
I think my suggestion is going to be yes, with the goal of getting a pre-release out there. Yeah.
So yes, to open GitOps. I'm gonna make some updates here.
Yeah, in the sense that, oh, I see what you mean. In the
You know what I'm saying? Like in the document, are we talking about GitOps?
No.
Oh no, because open GitOps is the name of the project.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, I see what you mean now. I thought you meant with the home.
No. Yeah. I got it.
Yeah. Okay. We're on the same page now. Can anyone not access this HackMD doc?
So it sounds like we have 3 or 4 people. Tony, I can see you coming up. Leonardo, Moshe, Scott.
Yeah, looks good.
Got an 8
Cool.
in this meeting and 8 in the HackMD, so it looks all right.
Cool. So maybe for the sake of future watchers, I'm going to share this screen because right now we're going to be talking about this, and it's not going to make a lot of sense for people who watch it. So let me do that now, if I can. I'm not even sure whether I'm able to in this. Yeah, share screen. Here we go.
Share screen's enabled. Go ahead.
Cool. So this is much more for the record than anything else, but I just thought it would be worth it. So question on the general kind of question is there anything here that people find controversial or would not be, like, is there anything at the high level? Do those things kind of reflect our collective understanding of what GitOps is? There's been some variation from kind of previous work. From the discussion on the GitHub issue, it seems like we broadly have a consensus. There might be some stuff that's missing, but there's a consensus that those are kind of capturing something important and valuable. Is that still the consensus about those 4 principles?
So I have a couple comments. So I think in general,
Yes.
the principles are good. So if you look at the titles, if we start on agreeing on the titles and then going into the text, it might make it easier. Number 1, principle of declarative configuration, that's fine. The principle of immutable configuration versions.
Yep.
So I don't understand the context of configuration there.
Do you want me to take this one, Brice, or?
Yeah, so I think that's just like very awkward wording. So I think if we can find a better way of expressing that sounds really good. So essentially, just immutable versions of an entire configuration set for a piece of software. So that would include all of the configuration data. Right?
I know what, but we're talking about GitOps.
Yeah.
So if we have declarative configuration, then we must have immutable. So I can have a immutable data version. So like, to me, it's the principle of immutable versions, not immutable configuration versions.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sure.
No. Are you just this was kind of a central discussion pretty much every time we've had this discussion, and Brice and I went over this a bunch of times before, just landing back on configuration, because I do agree with the idea that, this is really an an overlap between infrastructure as code and GitOps, right? Whether you call it configuration, whether you call it declared desired state, whether you call it data, in the end, it should be something that's short and expressive, in my opinion, and that's clear and is unambiguous. So far, I have not found anything better than configuration for that, because
But this is not unambiguous. So it's not clear whether you can have immutable data versions. So you've narrowed the scope of immutability by adding in configuration, and what is configuration is not clearly defined. So you've narrowed that scope. In my opinion, you widen that scope to say that everything must be immutable, not just configuration.
I do think that's what Brice expressed, but I don't believe that that's what we all actually have agreed upon, right, Brice? We haven't agreed. We've said elsewhere that this could be a system or basically a subsystem, right? So, and it could be very granular. It doesn't have to be all things. That's a happy path, but not a realistic one, especially if you're stepping toward GitOps, right?
So I think it's a question of, I think the header, I can get why it's not, it's just clumsy. I totally agree, and it doesn't really capture really what we're trying to say. Do you think that the detailing text below that header captures the idea correctly and clearly? That would be my question before we start.
Yeah.
On the principle of immutable configuration version, trying to find a better way of expressing that. Are we all in agreement with what that is, based on the description?
So desired state, yes. We call systems that store desired state in this way state stores. I don't think, I'm not sure principles can introduce new definitions for things.
So I think.
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
So we call systems that store desired state in this way state stores. So when you're talking about a state store, people are going to have very different interpretations of what that means, and you're now introducing a label to something that may or may not make sense. So for me, that is an item that should be taken out of the principles and then added back incrementally once you have consensus of the definition and the use of the word state stores.
So just a quick comment from me. I think one of the problems that I see here is that we're talking about configuration in the header, but there is no reference to configuration in the detail of that header, right? We say configuration has to be version and immutable, but then we talked about desired state. So is configuration analogous to desired state? Then we talk about state store. Is configuration analogous to state store? So I'm guessing that's where there might be some ambiguity. Yeah, so I would say we probably have to align the header of the principle. I do think it's supposed to be there. I do think immutable and versioning of state is definitely something that we have agreed upon. But I think it's just a matter of semantics, right? Is configuration state or not?
That's correct. And so far in the PR, there was the beginnings of a glossary to try to aid in this. But the idea was fully that if there is not a consensus on what these glossary terms should be used for, or the definitions, then we'll work on them, or we'll strip them down, at least for this phase, to something that is agreeable, that makes sense. I agree. State stores does sound, in itself, it may be, perhaps, like, I would almost want to say, anyway, it may be, it does call to mind other things that are not what we're talking about, like any database, for example, or whatever. I know we clarify that it must be, there must be immutable versions, but maybe the wording.
Would a simplification of saying the principles of immutable state, or of a version an immutable state, be an appropriate change. And then we only talk about the state and remove the state store. So the principle of versionable and immutable state. Desired state is stored in a way that supports versioning, immutability, and retains a complete version history, period. And we remove the where it's supposed to be stored, because that is actually not a component of the principle.
Yeah, so I think you're right. So I think like I introduced the idea of state store, and I'm wondering how do we handle this, right? So I introduced the idea of state store because in order to do GitOps, I think the way we want to have a really safe way of doing it that's repeatable and reliable, like you need to put certain constraints on the capability, or not really constraint, like minimum requirements on the capability of the system that's going to be storing that state. For us, that's Git, but actually, as I mentioned in the comments, I think like Git itself is insufficient to have a properly running GitOps system. You need to configure Git in a particular way. In particular, you know, as it stands by default, if you set up a Git repository, the master branch is not write protected. Which means that you can rewrite history, which goes against some of these ideas, which allows you to lose state and not being able to revert back to a previous known good state because you're allowing people to overwrite your history.
No, and I agree with that. But what I'm saying is, isn't that a more of a subject
That's
of
a
implementation rather than definition? Like
Yes.
So that's basically what I'm saying. I think how it is actually implemented should be out of the principle, and the principle should only talk about the fact that it should be immutable, it should be versionable, and it should be historically capable, whatever that means. You know, it should keep a log of history. How it's implemented, whether it's like what mechanism you're going to use to implement it, should be out of the principle.
Yeah, that's been so far we've held to that pretty strictly. So in summary, what I'm hearing you say is state store is just doesn't quite express it unambiguously, right?
I think it's basically unnecessary. I mean, a state store is just an implementation of something that is versionable and mutable, and that's going to store state. But the principle itself is that the state should be immutable and should be versionable and should be auditable. It should have a paper trail. So I think those are the core components of the principle.
I propose we immediately remove this. Can I get a second on that?
Yeah, I just did it.
Cool.
I think it's seconded.
So Leonardo, you had and I agree with the commentary here. I agree that, you know, this is not necessarily supporting. You had a good I can't remember what you said, but you had
I'm gonna put it here in parentheses. The principle immutable versionable state.
I would suggest we talk about desired state. The principle immutable versionable desired state sounds great. I move it to that to edit it to that new version. Can I get a second?
Personally, yes.
Cool. Any objections? Okay.
Awesome. I mean, this is all trackable, by the way, in since we're only allowing logged in members to. So yeah, I mean, this is a scratch pad. Let's definitely. This will all go back into a PR. You know?
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, I mean, that was clear to begin with. That like the problem is, desired state is a very good way to express what's going on. But if we say that over and over in these headers, they become kind of unwieldy. We want to be able to
should we?
I think version is the right word.
Yeah, I think version is right.
And that title or
looks right.
That makes way more sense than what it used to say, and it's more clear what we actually mean.
Now there's one thing that worries me, and that there is not a continuum in terms of concept. So we first talk about declarative configuration, and then we talk about immutable version desired state. So are we talking about the same thing, or is configuration and desired state something different? So I guess that's something we should talk about.
So,
Yeah.
so this is, I think this is one of the things that, you know, there are a lot of concepts in this that get quite involved, which is why I ended up Scott and I ended up writing so much beyond just those 4 principles, right? To kind of flesh out some of these ideas. And you can see a definition of like an attempt at defining what we mean by desired state at the bottom of the page, which is the aggregate of all configuration data for a system from its desired state. And the idea is that the desired state is sufficient to recreate the system so that a new instance of the system is behaviorally indistinguishable, right? That tried to do a functional definition of what desired state is, in that it is sufficient to perform certain set of actions.
Shouldn't the first one then be the principle declarative desired states?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, but we weren't settled on this. This is really good that we're all digging into this together. Yeah, configuration was the best stand-in. Once we started writing desired state all over the place and actual state, it started to seem excessively wordy, but I'm agreeing with you all personally.
Do you think so? So I think one of the reasons we ended up using configuration as well is desired state is very much something that we on the GitOps working group, we all kind of know what that means. But external people who might come into this, do you think that terminology is going to be clear enough for them, or do we need to describe what the desired state is before we start using it as in our definitions?
I think we can.
Go ahead, Moshe.
I think we can define desired state under that first principle. This is what we mean by desired state, and this is what we mean by declarative.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the rub. What I was hoping for, I think this is something we hope many of us would like. I think but let's see what you all think. Is to have this is purely a summary that will then link to more like canonically important notes for each of these 4 principles. And the idea, though, was that we would have one very short, easy to remember way of describing the principle that anyone could just say, oh, you mean the principle of declarative configuration, or the principle of declarative blah, 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 blah. Versionable, immutable versions, blah, blah, blah. And then to have really 1 or 2 sentences at most below each of those as a very short summary, so that someone coming upon this for the first time can read through and start to piece together, oh, at least I understand what they're saying, but tell me more. And in order to fulfill this principle, or at least to see kind of to what degree a tool or the maturity ladder of a company or whatever is implementing these principles, you would then have to go into the notes to really understand the important parts. So what I was hoping that we could do is, well, what do you all think about that as a goal?
I do agree with the goal. I don't think it's necessarily contradictory to using desired state as a kind of like overarching term. And Moshe's comment, if you ask me, I think it might be solved by adding a couple of words to that initial sentence, right? Like the principle of the declarative desired state, a system managed by GitOps must have its aggregate configuration, parenthesis, desired state, or, like add a couple of words, express declaratively. You know what I'm saying? Just a couple of additional words that hint that desired state is the aggregate configuration if necessary. But I think users of this pattern are going to have to familiarize with the concept sooner than later. So the sooner that they grasp, or that they grok what desired state is all about, the better.
Yeah, I agree with you. By the way, also, if I'm speaking too much, please tell me, or somebody's just let me know. Okay. I pasted in software system under the glossary extract below, because once we start talking about systems, it's fairly important to let people know that this isn't just one conception of a system. It could be as granular as I don't know, just your configurations for ingress, or just one application. And And usually it probably will start that way for a lot of people, especially migrating things over or testing things out. They're on a path to GitOps at that point. And they are, if they follow these principles, they'll be using GitOps still. They don't have to necessarily have everything in their life, including what they're going to eat for, breakfast tomorrow morning. You know what I mean? Like in Git, it's going to be, hopefully we can use the ideas of progressive delivery, and think about usership from a spectrum level there. You know what I mean? So perhaps, what do you think about this? Perhaps with a smaller version of, perhaps a smaller initial version of this could include some glossary items so that it's all one thing. Like, for instance, someone could print it out, What do you think?
I like the idea of having like a single letter or A4 page, which is, if you want to put it in a frame somewhere, this is GitOps, right? And that's that. I'm expecting a lot of the kind of specific terminology to have more complex ramification and fairly complex background. But I really like the idea of kind of having a single page document, which is, if the only thing you need, if the only thing you learn about GitOps is this one page, then you still have enough to kind of get started. I really like that idea. And I am not against either adding a glossary or as I've done it here, trying to fit in the definition of the terms we use when we use them, right? I imagine we can shorten that somewhat to make it a little bit more readable.
Does anyone have opinions about whether we keep the description in the summary shorter or have glossary items below?
I would go for kind of like merging just the necessary components of the glossary into the principle and then elaborating elsewhere, as opposed to trying to do both in one same spot. That's my vote.
Yeah, I get the second from Moshe. How about you, Robert? Christian is nodding.
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. It all kind of depends on what we're going to end up having, because short for some people aren't, maybe not short for others. So, so it's a little bit hard to say, and I think we're at least in like a borderland scenario here on the first principle.
So the objective here after this meeting, we're all going to have to be able to recite them by memory. So
yeah, you must descend. Step one in joining the cult is yeah.
That's right. We need a secret hand signal. Yeah, the little G or whatever. Anyway, can I play devil's advocate here for a moment? I'm not trying to work against the goal by doing so. I just want to be sure about this one thing, about in terms of style, because right now we're just talking about style, right? One of the nice things about a glossary below is that while I said it's great to, I would like to be able to print this out on a poster, it would also be nice to, even when you print it out on a poster, have the words that have special meaning underlined, or dotted line, you know what I'm saying? Like ultimately, there are various references throughout these principles to various terms, and the concepts are pretty important within each. And my only concern is that if we have to do this inline kind of research paper style, or MLA, a research paper style or whatever, where the first use of a word you define it, and then from that point forward you don't have to. My concern is that principle number one will be front loaded with pretty much everything we have to define, and then the rest will be fairly sparse because they'll reuse those concepts. That's my devil's advocate question to you all. What do you think about that?
To be fair, actually, we use the desired state in the very initial introduction, right? So I think we could keep the principle pretty lean by moving that declaration up above the first principle, so that the first principle is very digestible, while still introducing the idea earlier, so that once we get to the first principle, we kind of know what we're talking about. So I mean, I'm going to put it here for now, but that's right. We can do some editing around that. So that keeps the first principle very short, terse. And then we can talk about it just above, and I think that seems like the best of both worlds. We have an inline definition that doesn't front load the first principle either, while still providing the context.
Okay, let's see how it scales as we add more of the definitions. If it starts to feel bad, we can revert back to one of the other two ways, because right now we're just talking about style.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I'm just gonna, as you mentioned, I think there are some kind of special words or phrases that I've used italics to highlight those. Desired state being one.
Yeah.
So
snake case or yeah, title case.
Yeah. Actually, that's probably lives better here.
All right. Okay, so that was a really good sidebar. So what do you think about saying instead of immutable versioned, because that list could continue to go on and on. I think we're really trying to say just we want immutable versions, right? Should we say immutably versioned?
How about immutable desired state versions?
Mm-hmm.
Would that capture? I can see a nod from Leonardo and from Christian.
Yeah, I think those all sound good to me. Basically, just like, what's the scope of this? Can we like make sure that the scope is really limited here and clear? It's not just like an item list that we can keep tagging onto the end.
Yeah, I think that captures the three core things, right? It captures the idea that this thing is versioned, captures what is versioned, and it captures the idea that versions can't be changed. I think that those are kind of, there's a lot, I think this is extremely dense in terms of kind of meaning, but this captures those three things. At a first reading, I think if you're coming into this as having not kind of had the discussions this group has had, this might not all kind of fit in. But I think that captures the essential for that principle. Agreements, disagreements? Yep, I can see some thumbs up.
Yeah, I think that kind of sums up the principle pretty neatly, and I think it's a better worded version than the last one, at least.
Cool.
If we're talking about leaning some stuff out, is there anything we can do with number 3? Like if we're talking about like making stuff lean and concise, not to say that 3 isn't. I'm just saying if we're in the trimming fat mode, like is there anything there?
Yeah,
trimmed?
that sentence that somebody just highlighted, I would get rid of. Like, I think we're talking about drift, that's fine. I mean, whatever the source of drift is irrelevant to the principle, right? If there's
Yeah,
drift.
that could be part of the
definition
notes,
or
yeah, you're right. That could be part of the notes.
Yeah.
But just looking at the title for the principle of continuous state reconciliation, so I'm not sure I agree that continuous should be a principle of GitOps. It might be an ideal state, or it actually might not be an ideal state. You might want your reconciliation gated by a governance gate. It might be gated by tests that are running. It could be gated by deployment policies that state you can only make a change during this hour. So I think I think you should split the fact that we are doing state reconciliation from when that state reconciliation happens. I think that when is an implementation detail.
So I will set myself up as strongly disagreeing. Not in that you shouldn't make a decision about when the state should change, but that the commit you make should the semantics of making a change to the desired state should mean I want the state to change now. That is I now change my intent for this moment in time. It's not a proposal for a future change. It's a clear intent of my desired current state, and that should be immediately, and that should be synchronous to the operation and not asynchronous. I think I absolutely agree with you that I think in real systems and in real kind of governance models, you need GitOps to be able to support complex governance models. But that doesn't mean you're going to be reconciling state asynchronously from the change in the desired state. I really think that the desired state change should have a semantic meaning of, I intend my system to reflect this as soon as possible, rather than I want to do this something in the future. So this is where the pull request model comes in, right? Like you have another way of proposing a set of changes and validating that set of changes before it gets applied to your main branch. Sorry, I'm hiding the camera. Before it gets applied to your main branch. But once it gets applied to your main branch, that application has the meaning of immediacy. And that is continuous. Right? There's a continuous loop that's going on that reconcile those two things. So if you change the state, you should see the system change too.
Well, so I disagree there. So I don't think it's a matter of proposing a desired state. So the pull request is the mechanism for proposing, and you can run governance on that. When that commit lands into master or main, that is a desired state. It's not a declaration of when that desired state could be. Part of your desired state could be the policy that states changes apply between this window and that window. That is a valid, how that reconciliation occurs is part of your desired state.
I have to second what Moshe is saying here. Most of the tools that implement GitOps do allow configuring a time. So I think that's why I was proposing changing continuous to automated, because ultimately, if it's not automated, if reconciliation isn't automated,
it can't be continuous. I mean,
it's not really GitOps. Ultimately, I think it would be just like any other sort of CI job where you've got a temp set event based reconciliation. If they don't work, then you got to fix it yourself.
But that's what I mean by continuous, right? That's exactly, I think, what I mean by continuous.
I don't disagree with the word continuous. Maybe what I'm disagreeing with is, I think I'm just kind of like trying to play reconciler here. but really, Moshe, continuous doesn't necessarily have to indicate a specific cadence, or a specific.
But in the description it does. It says immediate.
Yeah.
So I think continuous is going to imply immediate. If you use the word automated.
Yeah.
So if you use the principle of automated state reconciliation, that allows for that automation to include time windows or other cadences for reconciliation, but ensuring that it happens automatically.
So the operational issue here, and this is one of the things. This is why I think we both agree what we're talking about. And what I think is really important from an operations point of view is that what you have in your Git repository at the head of your main branch is what should be there in your system right now when you see it, and that should always be true. Now the system might drift because we're in the real world, but we should never go into your main branch, read a configuration, and then not have the system, like the intended state of the system should be what's in that main branch. It shouldn't be, I intend my system to be like that at some point in the future, because then you're not able as an operator to go in and make that comparison, right? And even the tools are not able to make that comparison. So you break the ability to actually compare your system to what you intend your system to be. And you're no longer able to say with certainty, yes, my system is as expected, or no, my system is not as expected. That becomes a maybe.
No, but it's always going to be a maybe, because even if you're applying that desired state continuously, there's nothing that defines that state has been successfully applied. I can desire anything I want, And if that
Absolutely.
state has not been applied, I'm going to look at Git and assume that what's in Git is actually in the system. And as an operator, I'm going to expect that to be the same, and it's never going to reconcile. You can't expect those. So
Oh.
Git is not the reflection of what the running state of the system is. Git is the desired state. And there's a
Yes.
reconciliation loop, and there's an open issue or an open unsolved problem of how do I take my actual running state and reflect that back into Git, so that as an operator, I know that this desired state was actually unsuccessful, or this state hasn't actually been applied yet, or there's now drift that's occurred. So I think that's a distinct problem, but your intention is always going to be intention. It's never going to be fact. Unless
Right, but
you're
that's what I mean, right? Like if you allow for if you allow for the head of your main branch to not reflect your intention right now, then you have problem, right? You have problem because you can't make decisions about what your intentions are. So you're not even able to distinguish between a system that meets your intentions and one that does not. You lose that link.
Sorry, guys. I think I'm going to step in as moderator here for a second. Christian has politely raised his hand. I only noticed when I raised mine. So
sorry,
if we, yeah.
No problem. I think this is an important conversation, and I think there's two distinct things. So I'm going to sound like I'm speaking from both sides of my mouth. So bear with me. So there is the fact that where I make a change, I make a PR, it gets merged, right? We want that desired state to be reflected to the current state, right? And that may be, there may be feature gates in place, but it needs to make its way down there. So I agree that I think because automation doesn't necessarily mean continuous. However, there's the other side of it, right? Where it's like, well, if there is a change, like if someone did a kubectl patch, right, of a deployment, I'm going to use a simple example that fundamentally changes the behavior of the application, I want it to be automatically and continuously monitored and changed back to what my desired state is. So I think we need to define what we're talking about, delivering a change versus observing what's going on and reconciling that in the cluster. So I think if we define what we're talking about in number 3, it'd be maybe a lot easier to come up with a definition, because there's two scenarios though, right? So I'm leaning towards what Bryce is saying and agreeing with Bryce is saying, but I do hear what Moshe is saying, that when I make a change in my CI system, how that gets delivered may be different,
right,
for everyone.
It's worth I think it's worth probably stepping back and like having a look at what I intended to exclude when we were writing that with Scott, and the idea here is to deliberately and explicitly exclude event-driven traditional event-driven Git pipelines, right? That's what we want to exclude, explicitly exclude from our definition of GitOps. We should be, because a lot of people, I think, are saying we do GitOps, and what they really mean is we have Jenkins that pays attention to a Git repository, and when the Git repository changes, Jenkins runs a bunch of code to move our systems to whatever's in Git. That isn't GitOps, right? That loses a really important feedback mechanism. So I think that's what I'm trying to capture with the principle 3, is that I want to exclude event-driven and be very deliberate about being reconciliation-driven. And I think that I think everybody here agrees with those ideas. So maybe there's a better way of describing this about being reconciliation-driven.
So I think we can use the principle of reconciliation loops to solve that answer, because that's what a reconciliation loop does. It's not event driven. But just coming back to what's in Git should match what's in the infrastructure. So so I've done a lot of work.
Sorry, can we time back to this, Moshe, to 2 minutes? I'm fearing that the intended goal here, and also let's go in the order of hands raised next time too. Just I think if we're going to move this along, we need to do that.
I can't see the hands raised,
You
Scott,
cannot.
because I'm sharing my screen. So
I
give
can-
me a
I can
shout.
do that, and
when
I'm
that-
moderating, so I'll go ahead and do that.
So in terms of your desired state, you're assuming that you have the ability to allow a system to implement that or not, but you actually don't have any control of that system at all. You can make you can decide what is desired, and you can put in place a process to take that desired into the system. But ultimately, whether that change lands or not is not within your control. It's within the system's control. So if you, a principle cannot be that the main branch matches production or matches infrastructure, because it can never be. You're going to make a change, because you're going to make a change, and the moment you make that change, you've broken that contract, because it's going to take a couple seconds or however long it is to roll out that change, and in that moment that you're rolling out that change, your contract is broken.
Yes, I can't agree more, right? Like, absolutely.
I think the 2 minutes thing is, does that sound, am I being draconian by suggesting this?
So why don't we like, I think there's a couple of concrete suggestions here. So one is remove a continuous from the header, essentially, and I would be willing to, so just call it the principle of state reconciliation. And yes, I second the change.
So I would say not state reconciliation, but reconciliation loop.
Okay.
Which is a well understood term.
Just a comment, because I have my hand raised as well. I think the objective here is to remove as much as, so basically I think the exercise that we're trying to do here is reduce to the common denominator of agreement, right? So I vote for any word that is controversial, which is to get rid of it, move it elsewhere. So I would reduce it to its minimum possible form of agreement. And I think state reconciliation, everybody agrees upon. So I would say the principle of state reconciliation, loop, continuous, automated, immediate, all that is up for further discussion. And just keep it like very simple, because after all, this is the first iteration, version 0.1, and kind of like this additional level of detail. I think it's kind of like for a further iteration. So I would say principle of state reconciliation, period. And everything else is going to be discussed further along. That would be my vote.
Okay, I'm going to call on myself because I had my hand raised before the last several people.
Sorry, Scott.
That's totally okay. And I'm going to do my best to do this just to help moderate, not to try to strong arm anything. But I'm also participating a bit, and I'll keep mine under a minute, I promise. What I'm hearing is, so far I haven't heard one person have a concern about the word continuous in itself. At first it sounded that way, but what I really understood was it wasn't the problem with the fact that there should be a continuous operation. It was about the word immediate was the problem. Am I right about that? I think that was that.
No, so I have a strong objection to continuous, because continuous implies immediate.
Does it? I mean, continuous, everything CI and CD is immediate?
Yes, continuous implies immediate.
That's interesting.
So that,
okay.
Me, it does not. But yeah.
I'm almost done with my 1 minute. That was just a question about whether that would help, but it sounds like it is in fact controversial. I'm not going to debate it now. How about we just put that in the notes for ourselves and move on? So everyone seems to agree that this last paragraph should be in the notes, right?
Yeah, I would second that. Yep.
Okay, I've only heard yes to that. So
Yep.
Speak up if you don't think so. I'll take that and I'll pop it in the notes below. and then remove continuous and the word immediate. Is that what we all want? Or is there any?
I just wanted to say that shorting it to the principle of state reconciliation opens it up a little bit more, and implies that you can do that in different ways, which I think is better. Yeah, I didn't have anything else to add to that, other than the fact that the principle state reconciliation sounds more of a guiding principle rather than this is what you're supposed to do always. And obviously we want state reconciliation, but yeah, how you manage that, yeah.
I mean, I definitely don't feel like it's quite enough to differentiate it from normal CI. So if there is a concern about continuous, then I mean, we can remove that, but I definitely want to sidebar that as something to loop back to, because just personally, because I believe that basically this is the part that I agree with of what you said, Breeze. Not that I don't agree with anything else, but just strongly agree with, is that most CI systems, most CI jobs try to reconcile what you think you want with what you want to happen in an event-driven only model. So
not that that's the wrong model, right?
No, but it's just not
acceptable model. It's just not GitOps.
Yeah.
And I think the original the title here kind of suggests more of a. I agree that if you commit something into Git, and then something triggers that and makes that the current state of the system, I agree that if someone does anything manually, it should correct itself, because that is what we're trying to do with GitOps, right? It's not a CI/CD in itself. It's a principle that whatever's in Git, the current version should be there, and that should reflect in the actual realized version. But I'm not sure how to express that in a one-liner.
What about periodic? Oh, I'm sorry, there are two hands raised. I'll shut up.
Just a quick comment from me.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that I'm clear, I actually do agree with Briss. I do think it should be continuous, and I think it should be automated. But I think the exercise that we're going through, the purpose of this meeting is not to get to the level of detail where we are absolutely certain that the principles are kind of like reflections of the ideal scenario of what we're going for, right? We are trying to identify the minimum viable product, right? Kind of like the MVP representation. So although I actually agree with Briss, and I think this is the differentiator between GitOps and other CI/CD mechanisms. I think we can call this meeting a success if we have reached a minimalistic consensus across the four principles. So for that purpose is that I'm suggesting we distill the common denominator out of it.
Okay, I'm going to put a note. Principle 3, quote, continuous.
So I still strongly disagree with the word continuous. I think loop is a much better term here, which implies something happens on a regular cadence. That cadence can change. So if you look at a GitOps poll or a Git poll in Jenkins, that continuously polls a Git server for any changes or updates to Git and reapplies it, is a reconciliation loop, and not just relying on an event that can be lost. And if it's applied on a regular basis, even at a schedule, that is also a reconciliation loop. I think the continuous has too much behind it. If you stick with a reconciliation loop, I think it is a much better minimum viable description.
I think I understand your point. Sorry if I'm speaking out of turn. Please interrupt me, Scott. Somebody's got her hand raised.
Yeah, actually, Moshe did have his hand. Oh wait, that was just Moshe.
So
Let me lower it. Okay.
So yeah, I think I get where you're coming from. Actually, it's a case of it's not instantaneous. I think there's a difference between continuous and loops, which for me are kind of similar ideas to instantaneous. And I would absolutely agree that nothing can be instantaneous, and there's going to be lag in that loop. So I agree, right? And I also agree that the idea that immediately implies simultaneous, and that's not physically possible, right? These are distributed systems we're talking about. That's never going to be immediate. We can't do that. So I think being more subtle about it is probably warranted. Although, like I see where you're coming from. I'm starting to understand where you're coming from, Moshe, and why that's a problem. Why you think that doesn't capture the idea correctly. So the question is, how can we capture the kind of the reconciliation loop without implying immediacy or simultaneous action? And so I think whether we, principle of state reconciliation or state reconciliation loop, it's fine. I don't have a very strong opinion about that, but like I definitely want to capture the essence of what we're talking about in the description and kind of the short summary afterwards. Is there a way you can think that we can modify it to capture and exclude the event-driven systems while still being like capturing the subtlety of what you're talking about immediacy and simultaneity, which is impossible in real systems?
So an event-driven system is by definition not going to be loop-based. But just by using the principle of state reconciliation loops, you've excluded your event-driven systems.
I disagree with that fundamentally. Many CI systems, and we're talking about non-declarative CI systems here, have scripting built in, many with waits and loops and all kinds of stuff. It's very common.
So when I say loop, I have a very specific definition of,
I understand
of a loop. No, so it's not my definition. So this is in systems theory, when you have a reconciliation loop and a PID loop and all of these types of loops, they're very specific in meaning in distributed systems. And a loop always has a feedback mechanism into it. If it doesn't, it's an open loop. And if it's a closed loop, it's a closed loop. So the definition of the word loop in a distributed system has a very specific meaning.
Yes, this was the original GitOps, the initial GitOps principles, a closed loop, correct?
Yeah, but a closed loop and an open loop in systems theory are very, very specific, and almost all GitOps implementations are not closed loops, they're open loops, because a closed loop, it means that you have feedback back into the system, which means that you can see on your Git head whether that change has been applied or not. And more often than not, you cannot see whether that change was successful, which means it's an open loop, and your system is just going to reapply that change, reapply that change, reapply that change, reapply that change continuously, which is what is called an open loop, not a closed loop in systems theory.
Okay, so back to what Leonardus, real quick, can we sidebar this and move on, or do we think, because we're actually 2 minutes over our meeting time, I don't mind spending some extra time, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And if some people
so if we remove it, then we can move on. Yes.
I would say that if we remove both continuous and loop and just have the principle of state reconciliation, because that kind of captures the vibe at least, that would be a happy middle lane, I guess. Me at least.
I think we'll need more working sessions to get this to a state I think we're all happy with. So as an initial thing, we can do that. But I'm starting to appreciate kind of some of the subtlety you're talking about, Moshe, and I think that's we should be exploring that stuff, because we want to. I think you're right that we should be using those terms correctly, and we should be pretty. Given that this is kind of foundational, we can spend the time on doing the work on getting that right. So I don't mind revisiting that in the future. I'd like to continue the conversation, is what I'm saying.
Cool.
But in the meantime, if we want to say, for this meeting and for the sake of brevity for this meeting, we can kind of build on top of state reconciliation and move on and start talking about the more detailed stuff and getting that really right next time. I'd be open. I'd be okay with that.
Yeah. So Robert, I just don't want to lose something that you said, Robert. What was your wording suggestion? Just to at least write it.
I said, just if you just keep it to the principle of state reconciliation, and that's it, because I feel that is the principle. However you might implement that.
Okay, so I'm just going to put these temporarily in brackets with question marks, and we'll revisit it. This is really good. One thing we did was we moved that last sentence into notes below, and that was fantastic. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get into principle 4 and respect everyone's time. So, but we should do this weekly. And in the end, there will be a pull request for this too. So even people who couldn't be on this call, like for instance, if you're watching from home, this video, the spirited debate, you did not miss the boat. You can still comment on the pull request. This is just an attempt to distill to the non-controversial items only for the first pre-release. Does anyone have anything else that what needed to be said, not debated, but noted for next time? Or do you feel like this captures it? Oh, thanks for whoever put that last loop system control theory note in there.
Yeah, no comment from me. I think, as I said, I think this is a discussion worth continuing, Marsha, and yeah, I look forward to kind of digging more and truly understanding what bothered you about that, because I think there's something there.
Cool. I like it too. Okay, so we'll make a doodle poll, and this time we'll go ahead and say it will be done by, I don't know, Thursday or something like this, and then we'll publish it to not only the GitHub issue and Slack, but also the SIGApp delivery mailing list as well. So please, everyone, we'll make it like right now. Yeah.
Why don't we just make it a recurring meeting at this time?
So what I like recurring meetings. One of the issues is some of the people might be in different time zones and not able to participate at this particular time. If it turns out that next week at the same time is perfect for everybody, then it would probably just end up recurring. But I think it might be a little bit better to just double check that we don't have people who just can't attend this time and would be excluded out of it. I was originally thinking that we might have 2 sessions a week at very different times, specifically to cater for different time zones. But just to double check that people who want to make it aren't excluded.
That would be great. And also, Moshe, well, I understand what you're saying. There was also from someone else a note to please, if possible, not do it on the Sabbath. So so to not exclude people from specific religious backgrounds. So if anyone has anything like that, we can also try to narrow down the time options. Yeah. Okay, any other burning things? I'm not doing my job well. It's 2:08. Pretty close, but not perfectly. All right, cool. You all are awesome. Doodle poll coming soon.
Cheers, everybody. Thank
All
you.
right,
Thank you so much for
Yes,
joining
this was
us.
great.
That was
Yeah.
really good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.